Welcome to the Devil's Rest Book Club, where we dive into the details of the Sun Eater universe. I'm Cameron.
And I'm Drew. And this week we'll be covering chapters 1 through 3 of the first book in this series, Empire of Silence. So
We
here we
have
go.
talked about this for so long, wanting to do this, and the
Yes.
fact that we're finally here and recording. When you went, so this is our second read through, right?
Yes.
We've mentioned this. It takes on a completely different life of its own, even from page one, as we'll get into. But
Yes.
like reading the book the first time, you and I had bonded over talking about sci-fi for quite some time, right? Did you think that you would be wanting to record as in depth of a podcast as we're planning to do on this series?
So definitely not, but I will say that I don't do a lot of rereading, period. And so when I finished the series, I was very excited to revisit it, very excited at the opportunity to revisit it just because I love the series so much. So like there are some series that I've read that it's just it can be kind of like a lot of work going back through it. But this one is like I'm just very excited to get back into it. And as I've started reading, it's like, oh, everything's recontextualized, everything's new. You sort of go in with a fresh pair of eyes and stuff. So it's really exciting. It's been really positive. It's awesome.
Yeah, and as of the time of recording, we're anxiously awaiting book seven
Yes.
of this
In
seven-book
November.
series to come out in November.
Yes.
I mean, clearly we won't get there on our second reread before we read book seven too, but
Right.
I'm stoked to at least come back to the beginning of where it all started before
Mhm.
we end up where it actually begins. So
Yes.
with that in mind, you wanna get started and talk about chapter one?
Yes. So I think first things first is that we have details before the story actually starts. If you have the physical copy of the book, you'll notice that there's an introduction before you actually get to page one, really, that talks about this being like an in-universe document, which is just like a really cool. I love storytelling beats like this, where if you're in a different story and there's like a in world history thing, and this happens before we even start, and it says being the account of the Sun Eater, Hadrian Marlowe, of the war between mankind and the Cielsen, translated into classical English by Tor Palos of Nolbagar and Colchis, which is like gobbledygook if you've never read anything of the series. It's like 10 question marks in a row. Like, like who is any of this? What does any of this mean? Which is just awesome.
And
And
just
just
to be clear, like Christopher Ruocchio is the author of the series. I don't know if we mentioned that up front. He's around my age, like clearly influenced by some of the best in the business. But the fact that he loves the detail enough to put world building on the title page of the book,
yep,
of the in-universe book,
yep,
is next level. So I was audiobook for my first listen through or go through of the book. So now that I have a physical copy, I didn't notice that literally in universe there is that same thing you just read in a separate like Sanskrit-esque language, which like tells us so much even before we even start doing anything.
yeah,
It tells us that like the language that it's written up top is the lingua franca, like the language that gets utilized by this universe, and that the document that we're reading is a transliteration of that back into our English in like which is referred to as classical English, which tells us another thing that this is so far in the future that 2025 is considered classical English, at least to some extent, right?
yeah, yeah,
It also tells us that it's his account, like an interpersonal account, and it tells us about a war between mankind and the Cielsen, which we know nothing about yet. But something that I noticed too is I speak a little bit of Spanish and was looking into maybe this is specious at best, but potentially the etymology of the word Cielsen could be ciel as in like el cielo is heaven or the heavens in Spanish. And I looked up sinis in Latin, which is either ashes or ruin or destruction. So by this first title page, we know that we're in a future history where English isn't the spoken language. We know that there's a war between humanity and this ruin of the heavens potentially, and that like there is some group who is translating this back into English for somebody's benefit
uh-huh,
on this planet or in this place that we've never heard of. So just before the book even starts, he is laying seeds that we will pick up
yeah.
and look upon later in the series, which I think is fascinating.
And also the minor fact that someone apparently eats a sun at some point, which is
Right.
kind
Yeah.
what is
Right.
this? What is a sun eater? What does that mean?
Yeah. What does that even mean?
Yes, it's super cool.
First, and it's not going to stop there because the first page just, I want you to go ahead and read the opening line because it's the best I've ever heard.
Yeah, I think I'm going to read the whole first paragraph. This is like, what's interesting about this, I picked up the whole series at once because I had been thinking about pulling the trigger on it. I get it. And then I read the first paragraph and it's like, oh, so I'm going to read the whole series because this paragraph is like genuinely like probably the best opening paragraph of any book I've ever read. So it's great. So the first paragraph goes like this. Light. The light of that murdered sun still burns me. I see it through my eyelids, blazing out of history from that bloody day, hinting at fires indescribable. It is like something holy, as if it were God's light, or the light of God's own heaven that burned the world and billions of lives with it. I carry that light always, seared into the back of my mind. I make no excuses, no denials, no apologies for what I have done. I know what I am. What are we doing? Like, who is this man? Who is this man that has written this, and who is this man that we're talking about? It is genuinely unbelievable that this got written. This is this man's first published book.
It's
makes you feel a little bit inferior knowing that this guy is like our age writing this. Yeah. It's really wild. So from this we know like that apparently this character that's writing this is the person who murdered his son. So we're not talking about like a metaphorical like he's the son eater scare. Like apparently there was an actual son that was eaten, right? It's something murdered, like this.
Yeah.
Murdered the son, billions of lives taken along with it, and he carries it along forward. So amazing first paragraph, just really
best first paragraph of any book I've ever written. Period.
Yeah.
Or read.
Yeah, me too.
Period. End of story.
It's great. Yeah,
because it's littered with so much stuff too, and you know. We've talked about it beforehand. We don't plan on spoiling anything for later in the series, but we'll point out little bits and pieces.
Yes.
Light is a huge theme and a huge symbol throughout the entirety of the series that will keep coming up, keep coming up, and keep coming up. And that's the first word of the book.
Yeah.
So when we get to books 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on, even 7, we'll keep coming back to this first paragraph as reference because he begins with the end in mind too. So in this first paragraph, we know that like at the end of this story, a son is murdered and billions of people have died. And apparently this is the guy that did it.
Yeah. And he's not like, I think I like those last couple of sentences so much too, because he's like, yes, I'm taking full responsibility for this. There's no, like, I'm not trying to claim that this is not something I did. I absolutely did this, and I know exactly what I am for having done it. Like it's really, it's interesting. He's not saying I've been accused of this thing that I've not done. This is my true side. Like no, it's like no. This is what I am the sun eater, and we're going to talk about it. Yeah, it's really cool. I love it.
And not only that, too, it's surprisingly honest. So I've read the Book of the New Sun recently because I've read this book, and it was an influence on Ruocchio. And it's also told from a similar like first person perspective. Like this is a document in universe that the main character of the story is writing after the events of the story. And in that case, like we need to keep an eye out because it's a first person account of when he could potentially be like obfuscating the truth. But up front, he's like really honest. Like from the very beginning, it's like, I know that a lot of people would look at what I'm doing and think I'm the villain, but I'm so sure in what I've done. I know who I am, and read if you want. I think that's really cool. But we just have to keep our eyes out from potential moments where he could be, you know, obfuscating blame a little bit. If he does, we don't know yet that yet.
Yeah. And I think what's really cool too is that also after this opening paragraph, there's just so much on the first page and a half of this that is just, I mean, just throwing world building details at us from the first 2 pages. And so we have this amazing introductory paragraph. And then after that, I mean, we're just like inundated with stuff about the universe. Like we know so much after reading these 2 opening pages. I mean, we know that there is this horrible man-eating alien race called the Cielson that's referenced before we even get onto this page.
Yeah.
And we sort of know that they came out of deep space, sort of like out of nowhere, and just like things start going crazy. We also know that because of this first page and a half, 2 pages, that the empire that's in this has an official story, and this is not the official story. This is Hadrian's account of what happened, his experience in the war. And we also are told here that this supposedly the official story ends with our narrator being executed, which is
Right. Which
interesting because
clearly has not happened.
he's writing this right now. So it's very interesting. He's like, so yeah, I was apparently executed, but this is actually what happened, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's really, really pretty amazing. Pretty amazing.
Going back to some of it too on the world building pieces,
Yes.
like he uses terminologies like old Earth.
Yes.
And not only that, like it's capitalized for some reason, which when we discuss more, will sort of postulate on the possibility of why that is. But
Yes.
it's telling us that, like, okay, humanity has expanded so far beyond our solar system, which to
Mhm.
us seems like so foreign because we can't even make it to Mars, right? But
Mhm.
we're theoretically so far in the future that old Earth is considered old. It's the homeland, it's the planet, but it's like
Yes.
we're not going to be going there, presumably.
I also think it's worth pointing out this is also demonstrated in the opening paragraph, but just the prose used to describe some of these things. Should I chronicle the war then? Start with the alien Cielson howling out of space in ships like castles of ice. Like I mean, it just the descriptive language, especially like Ruocchio has like this like two kind of mode like he in this mode he flips into where it's just like this amazing beautiful language to describe just space and just it's pretty unbelievable when he's in this mode. It's like you're watching a movie in your head as he's
Yeah.
describing these things. It's unbelievable.
But he throws so much at you in these modes too, because like I mean, even in this first three paragraphs, like a single word choice is one that means a lot. So something I noticed too is that when he's talking about like how humanity gets out of old Earth, it says those peregrines making their voyages to new and living worlds. So I looked at the word. I know peregrine's a bird, but I looked up like what the bird is, and it's like a falcon. It's the fastest animal on the planet.
Mm.
So, and it's also like in some cultures analogous to like celestial power because it's the fastest animal on the planet. It also has a dual meaning because it means that if somebody is a peregrine, it means they're coming out from another land or country. And on top of that, too, this is foreshadowing for the future. The Egyptian god Ra has the head of a peregrine, which is adorned with a solar disk, which may not be a reference that he's making here, but if it is, this guy is on 5 levels deep, and it's gonna take us forever to get
Yeah.
through. So maybe that's just me reading into it, but like
Yeah. This we
you
see
could
the
pick apart every
symbols.
word. Oh my
Yes.
gosh.
Yeah. I think, another thing that I think is worth mentioning here is sort of going back to that last couple of sentences in the first paragraph about making no denials. I know what I am. He sort of talks about, I don't feel like, these tomes that I write, these things I write may not be read by anybody. And there's this line, the worlds have had enough of tyrants, enough of murderers and genocides, which is interesting because he's referring to himself, which is a really interesting thing to be talking about in reference to you, right?
Right. Right.
There aren't very many characters throughout history that own these labels. So I'm fascinated to sort of explore why he feels like those labels have been thrown at him, if they're fair, like all these things. It's just an interesting way to start a story. And it's just fantastic.
Yeah. So yeah, going back to the excuses and denials too, he's not necessarily saying that those are unfair comparisons,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
He clearly understands that the impact of his events in history have led to massive destruction on
Mhm.
a galactic scale, but he doesn't show remorse, and he understands why people have sort of put him in that category of
Yeah.
tyrants, murderers, genocides, a monster, which will come up a ton as we go through the series too. But the
Mhm.
guy that like is talking here and the guy that we're about to like meet as his like growing up story, two polar opposites. For me, it was impossible to see like when he starts describing his childhood how he could have ended up being this guy because he's just such a different person.
Yeah. Yeah. It's on that. There's this theme sort of present in this first page, second page, that is sort of present throughout the book that I think is like probably the most important theme for me that I love about this series, which is there's these grand things happening. You know the grand story, and I'm going to take you on a very humble beginning kind of experience. Yes, there's all these things going on. There's this war, all these things. And so let us bypass history, sidestep the politics and the marching tramp of empires, forget the beginnings of mankind and the fire and the ash of old earth. And we're just going to go with let us move on to the beginning, the only beginning I have a right to, my own. And we're just starting at the start of his life rather than jumping straight into this massive full scale craziness. He's like, no, like I'm starting at the beginning of me. That's all I have the right to talk about. It's great. So this comparison between the large and the small, intimate moment that's present in this book, and it's present on the second page. It's fantastic. I
And
love
it's going picking up what you're saying there in particular. I hope that this series gets adaptations in film in some form or fashion, but I have no idea how you could possibly emulate the amount of world building in the first page and a half of this book, even with the title page included, in
it. Yeah,
any other medium. And
yeah,
what like absolute balls this guy has to just like throw so much world building, like because he's not talking about, but he's hinting at little things that have happened throughout the history of the series that he's creating. Like, as you mentioned, the fire and ash of old Earth. Okay, so now we know that Earth is dead, presumably, right?
yeah,
Something happened to Earth.
yeah, yeah,
And then he talks about like his dad and like his dad's titles and all this different stuff. There's just so much. I want to backtrack just a little bit to the end of the paragraph before you read there, where it says, "You want to feel the heat of two civilizations burning up and to meet the dragon, the devil that wears the name my father gave me."
yeah.
Um, so
Very
he,
clever.
well, going back to what you were saying earlier too, I mean, people already put him in the same league as these like terrible figures in human history, but he's also saying that it's like mythical to some extent, right? Like I'm not a dragon, like I'm not a devil. Well, maybe I am. I don't know. The theme of devils, like the imagery of the devil, is going to come up in every book in the series, and in the first few chapters of the book is going to come so much. But another piece too is like that wears the name my father gave me. So there's this like even still, he's like, okay, now that we're going to go back to his childhood, we should really pay attention to the relationship between Hadrian and his father, because his father is mentioned a lot in the first page and a half. And I'm interested to find out. We're not there yet, and I haven't come up with a decision on my second read through if he's trying to blame his dad and his dad's treatment of him
Mm.
for the ultimate outcome of some of this book. I don't know yet. We're
Mm.
just at the beginning of our second read through, but it's something that came up with me even just looking back at this first two pages, because then it goes on to like talk about him being the eldest son and heir to Alistair Marlowe, the Archon of Maidwa Province, Butcher of Leanon, and Lord of Devil's Rest. No place for a child at Palace of Dark Stone, but it was my home all the same, amid the Logothetes and the armored peltasts who served my father. But father never wanted a child. So right, like even still, he's already painting an image of this guy who is a lordly sort of figure, but clearly he doesn't like him. Right? He and his father already don't have a good relationship, and we're not even done with page two.
Mm. Yeah. I just love this final paragraph of this opening sort of series here about names as
Yeah.
you're talking about dangerous things names, a kind of curse defining us that we might live up to them or giving us something to run away from. I've lived a long life, longer than genetic therapies of the great houses of the peerage can contrive, and I have had many names. During the war I was Hadrian Half Mortal and Hadrian the Deathless. After the war I was the Sun Eater. To the poor people of Borisepho I was a myrmidon called Hag. To the Jadians, I was Alnarobus. To the Cielsen, I was Omnium Belu and worse things besides. I've had many things, there have been many things, soldier and servant, captain and captive, sorcerer and scholar, and little more than a slave. But before I was any of these, I was a son. It's
Just beautiful.
it's it's great. And this pattern is just like the thing that I love. Just like, hey, we're like in a funnel, right? everything's gigantic in this series, and it's massive. But right now we are a sun, and that's where we're starting. And so this is sort of opening couple of pages that is like a promise from Ruocchio, like, listen, we are small. I promise things will get very big. Yeah, yes. And it's great. It's a perfect
I
way to
didn't
start a book.
I didn't get that on my first listen through, like my first
Yeah.
go through the
Yeah.
book. And it
Yeah.
gets very small. And we'll get there. But
Yeah.
going back to like the names in particular. So the names that we have here, at least to the two major characters that have been introduced up to this point, are him and his dad, right? So let's start with like the last name. I went and looked it up, and Christopher Ruocchio has admittedly mentioned where the name Marlowe comes from. In this universe, theoretically, House Marlowe is a direct descendant of Christopher or Kit Marlowe, who was a playwright in England from 1564 to 1593. He's mentioned that in some interviews and stuff like that, but it's funny because presumably there's a lot of speculation that Christopher Marlowe was actually gay and never he had no heirs. But at
Okay.
least in Ruocchio's universe, this guy had kids at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But he was like an early influence on Shakespeare, who comes up in the series as well. But most interestingly, he is probably most famous for his play, which is a retelling of a German folklore called The Tragical History of the Life and Death of Dr. Faustus, which that's where we get the term Faustian bargain, right? The idea of a man who famously makes a deal with Lucifer, facilitated by the demon Mephistopheles, who is a messenger for Lucifer, where he's trading his soul for magical power and ultimately forsakes repentance and goes to hell when that contract is up. So we've already had the image of the devil so much, like in the beginning, and it's not going to stop, right? Because we'll find out in just a minute that and even in the page 2 it says like the Lord of Devil's Rest. So the home that he grew up in was called Devil's Rest. Devils clearly have like a big impact on making Hadrian who he is. And even at the end of his like story, as he's writing this from, you know, the future of the like looking back on these events, like clearly that he could never escape that title of being the devil, right?
Yeah.
And just another tie back on that one, Lucifer, right, who is also known as Lightbringer. Hadrian admits on page 1 that like he's like the light is the first word of the book, right? But bringing the light in Hadrian's case means destroying a sun and killing billions of people. So there's just so much in the names that we should look out for.
Yep.
I couldn't find anything specifically on like Alistair, especially the way that he spelled it, but it's potentially a reference to Ruocchio has mentioned the series Revelation Space by Alistair Reynolds before in some interviews. I think it was with Mike from Mike's Book Reviews. It could be wrong, but so it could be that, but it's spelled slightly differently. Maybe it's just a cool name. I think it's a cool name. I was actually almost named Alistair by my parents, but
Really?
glad they didn't. Yeah, definitely not.
Oh man.
But then he also mentions like his name, right? Like Hadrian's name is like the name of famously a name of a Roman emperor, right? He's Hadrian, the emperor of Rome, ruled from 117 to 138 AD, and is considered like one of the 5 good emperors of the Roman Empire post-Republic era.
Yeah.
Hadrian ultimately was responsible for Marcus Aurelius, who everybody's famous is known for the book Meditations and his like sort of Stoic philosophy, which is clearly mentioned in the series as well. He is responsible for getting Marcus Aurelius on the throne as emperor because he made a deal with his successor, Antoninus Pius, to say, "Hey, I will make you emperor, but only if you like take in Marcus and another guy as like your sons and like train them up to be potential emperors."
Interesting. It's pretty amazing how rich Ruocchio's like background and knowledge is and what he just infuses into these books. I mean, from what I understand about his background, he's got a background in classics and also has a great appreciation for history, particularly Roman history, and that comes through a lot in the books. And it's really cool that there's so much present in the novels because of that. Like there's a lot of rich history of ours that it just finds its way into the books. It's really cool. We're not going to catch all of it. It's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. So it's really cool to see. It just makes it very rich culturally to read. It's pretty great.
Yeah. And realistic, at least it gives us cultural ties to things that we can go look up in our own history and time to sort of, and that's the best thing about the second read through is taking it really, really slow so that we can try and catch some of these things. Now, we may not be right, but again, neither you or I have backgrounds in classics. We're just big science fiction fans.
We're just dudes.
Yeah, we're just two dudes who like the series a lot.
Yeah.
But I'm also excited to learn some of those things that I didn't pick up or I know. And I already have. We're 30 minutes in and like a page and 3/4, right?
Yes.
I've already learned a lot about history and the Roman Empire and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I think the first 2 pages are just like drastically more dense than most of the experience of the book, right? And so it was worth spending the time to go through those couple of pages just because there's just so much massive stuff. A lot of it is foreshadowing and details that we probably couldn't get into just because of more information that we have because we've read on, but just a lot of promises that I'm really looking forward to going back through, and people will be able to look forward to living out and experiencing as they read through the book too.
I expect we will come back to these passages more than any other piece of the entire series, right? And be like, he said it here on page 1 and 2.
Yeah.
That this was going to happen. He set it up before he even wrote the rest of the first book, presumably, or before we got through the rest of the first book.
Yeah.
But now we have this sort of break and we can sort of go into Hadrian's story. And it starts with something really, really interesting that you pointed out as well. But like the first thing he says is, my mother was late to my birth and both of my parents watched from a platform above the surgical theater while I was decanted from the vat. What?
I love this first line is so clever. My mother was late to my birth, because it's so disorienting, right? Because it has nothing to do with our human experience.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. Sort of reintroduces this, it's like this coldness almost, like with, it's sort of teased with talking about Alistair in the first couple of pages, but like just like this distance that is immediately established between Hadrian and his parents. It's like mother didn't even show up on time to him being born. It's pretty amazing.
It's awesome. But something I want you have a better background than I do on psychology and stuff like that. Something that just came up for me is we need to look at attachment styles as they relate to mom and dad, right? Because this seems so something that we learn is like, well, one, noble women no longer have to like bear the cost of pregnancy and childbirth, right? They it's in a vat. And two, if mom was late, that's sort of an inversion of like, oh, dad was late to the baby being born, right? But mom can't be late to that. So that's a crazy inversion that he did. But it tells us a lot about his mom, that she was clearly preoccupied with other things other than seeing him be quote unquote born out of this vat.
Yeah.
Potentially we could, the attachment styles that these characters have could be influencing Hadrian as a person too.
Well, also, what attachment does that generate for Hadrian himself due to the absence of his parents? Because, you can almost analyze sort of the generational pattern that emerges because of the way that humans have been separated from regular human experience of having a child, stuff like this. I mean, parents may be this way because their mother too was late to their birth, right? And so it tells us a lot about the culture of this very distant, almost alien feeling world very early on, just because of the absence of his parents, even when he's there. And quickly, I think, jumps into dad not being there long either. Yeah, he's around for like an hour or something like that, and then very quickly leaves. It's
at least he was on time, I guess. I don't know.
He was on time, but he had better places to be very quickly.
Some very visceral thing for me that I picked up in this piece too is he was born with all the teeth in his head, which sounds like a nightmare for a baby to be born with all of their teeth. It seems so gross. I don't know. You and I both had kids this past summer.
Yeah.
The idea of a baby being born with a full set of teeth is like horrifying.
It's horrifying. It's disorienting in the same way that the opening line is for this. I love that he's sort of kicking you in the teeth, like you are not in the world that you are familiar with. This is a different place. Yeah, these are technically humans, but not different. They're very different than you, right? Most of us have a mother that has to be there. She doesn't have a choice, unfortunately, and we mostly don't have full sets of teeth when we're born. All right,
and we'll find out later, this is a little bit of foreshadowing too, is there are consequences for actually having what we would consider a natural birth too, which will harken back to this, like this is the way it's done. He goes on to say, thus nobility is always born without encumbering the mother and under the watchful eye of the imperial high college. ensuring that our genetic deviations had not turned to defects and curdled in our blood.
Yeah.
His prose is unbelievable. Again, we're still on page 2, and we know that, like, okay, everybody in the noble class presumably is born the exact same way, and this is like totally normal
Yeah.
for the parents to be so disconnected from the actual generation of their child, which is going to tell us a lot about the society ultimately too.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing. It has very little to do with the way that we experience life, but it's good. And we're given a little bit of extra world building about mom too. Apparently, it prefers the company of women. It's sort of leaning into this idea that mom and dad, even their relationship, is not really truly what we would conceptualize as a parenting relationship, right? I mean, they have generated a child, but it is just because they have done that does not mean that that represents the same thing that would constitute a marriage for us.
They both sired a child,
Correct.
essentially.
Yeah.
But they've not. He goes on to say too, like, besides childbearing of the traditional sort, like you mentioned, would have required my parents to share a bed, which neither was inclined to do. It's like,
Right. Yeah.
okay, mom and dad, yeah, clearly don't have
Yep.
a lovely, happy marriage, right? Where they would want to spend that much time together.
Yeah. We find a little bit more about dad. My father was not the sort of man who had vices. He was possessed by his office and by the good name of our house. Just the roles that these parents inhabit. It's very important, I think, as we get into this. We're sort of, Hadrian's born, but very quickly establishing what are parents like, because like this is and we're sort of revealed pretty quickly that Hadrian isn't really raised by his parents either. He's really raised by servants around him. There's one that's particularly important to him that we'll get into in a minute. Um, but just as a distance that's developed immediately as he comes into the world, which I think is particularly important for the start of a character that supposedly becomes a, I don't know, genocidal devil or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you were, I agree. He's one of, as nobility probably was in the olden times in our sort of part of human history that happened hundreds of years ago. Yeah, that's pretty typical that the lord or the father would not be as available to their child because they're dealing with affairs of state, right? Which clearly his father is. But he spends way more time with his dad than he does his mom at all. And so that clearly has informed him looking at that as the example of like, oh, well, one, if I'm going to be the heir, then these are the shoes that I have to fill. And how do I have to be like him and how do I don't?
Yeah.
And very quickly we'll find out that he and his dad are very, very different people.
Yeah. And I think another thing that's important at the start here is Ruocchio gives us context for where we sort of fall in the timeline for when he's born. It's made clear that as Hadrian is born, the war with the Cielcen has been going on for something like 3 centuries. It's shown and described to be far away, so it's not like on their doorstep, but it's been happening for
20,000 light years away, which is a huge distance.
Right. And so sort of once again leaning into this theme that, I mean, it's going to come up again in chapter 2, I believe, which is that we have very small important things going on. His parents being distant, how is that going to affect our character? And also there's this big terrible thing going on that hasn't this very, very far away. And so we have this scale that's consistently present, and it's been going on for longer than any of us will live in our timeline, right? And it's further than we've ever traveled. And the scale of the universe has been made very clear amidst this. Where do we fall in the timeline, so to speak? I think it's important.
Which is a big theme throughout the book too, as we'll get into when we start dealing with space travel, is Ruocchio does a really interesting job of talking about, one, the vastness of a galaxy, but two, also the potential tolls on that. Something I wanted to make a note of here is the idea that we sort of experience too here on Earth is like the further. So for instance, the war in Ukraine doesn't get talked about that much as it used to when it was initially happening, right? Because it's far away for us on Earth, right? Think about the idea of like this 300-year-long war that has been going on that is infinitely further away. So that's going to inform Hadrian, at least at the beginning, of like, okay, he'll hear events that are happening elsewhere in the galaxy, but he can't like fathom or imagine what is actually happening because it's just so far away. And it's the same sort of concept that we have here on Earth, that the further you are and removed from more, the less real it is. And the more distant you are, the less it sort of impacts you on an emotional level.
Yep, and we're going to be hit by that theme a couple of times in the opening chapters of this book. It's really important. It's probably one of my favorite themes of the book, and it's very present in these early chapters. And so as we're talking about, him being born in this context, parents, quickly go back to their own stuff. We also learned that Hadrian has a brother who's born. He's larger, more obedient than him, is how he's described. And we're sort of given a sort of brief introduction to some of the different people that raise him. He's raised by servants, he's not raised by his parents. And of those, one sort of is mentioned to be particularly important, which is Gibson. Okay. And Gibson is a sort of, it teaches him like philosophy, but also cultivates this growing interest in the Cielsen that Hadrian has. So we also have, Gibsonisms jumping in very quickly. Gibsonisms is, sort of these mantras that are just going to be beaten down on us. I think if our first one is knowledge is the mother of fools. Remember, the greatest part of wisdom is recognizing your own ignorance. And we're just going to have this stuff thrown at us. It's just great stuff, right? Calling back to, just we're going to have a little bit of fear is the mind killer action going on in this series. So it's great. Yeah.
Yeah. And admittedly in Ruocchio's interviews, this character is very much influenced by a very, very close childhood friend of his that is actually Gibson is where we like get a lot of you and I are fans of like philosophical science fiction. I think that's where we initially bonded over Dune was like how crazy the philosophy and like the ideas that Herbert was dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
This book deals a lot with philosophy and action and characters. And the primary voice that we get that philosophy from, or that voice of reason, is Gibson. So we will be talking about Gibson for hundreds and hundreds of hours to come.
Yes.
I do want to go back though to Crispin, because like Crispin also, this is at the beginning of this book, Crispin, his brother, I mean, you and I both have brothers, right? Like,
yes.
Like the relationship that we're about to see with him and Crispin is very different than the relationship that you and I have with our brothers, right? Like it's also, he's already aligned Crispin with his dad, saying like the ideal heir. We should keep an eye out for how Crispin's behavior informing what we can know about Hadrian and what we can know about Alistair and how it impacts him too as we sort of begin this origin story.
Yeah. And also just like the way that Hadrian describes Crispin, I would just invite people to just pay close attention. Because it's interesting how this is one of the first reasons we should be reminding ourselves that this is a firsthand account of our main character's perspective on his brother and his family, right? This is not an objective account. And I think Crispin is one of these first situations where we should really take into mind this is a perspective from a brother about his brother that he's having negative feelings towards. And just keeping that in the back of your head as you're hearing descriptions of Crispin, just kind of questioning how reasonable is Hadrian's interpretation of Crispin here. This is a brother he's having conflict with. So another detail I caught, father's mentioned to be 300. Early, which so old dude, like been around roughly as long as the war has been raging on at this point. Also, another detail as we're pushing towards Gibson a little bit more, he's mentioned to be a scholiast, which is explained to be a person that is aims to replace machines in this universe, which are called daemons for some reason and are regulated and often banned by something called the chantry, which is like a whole bunch of stuff we don't know a whole lot about yet. But scholasts, roughly, kind of mentats, not precisely, but they're kind of like mentats from Dune, if people are familiar with that. They're fill a similar role that they do in the Dune universe, sort of replacing thinking machines so that we have something that's powerful, can recall things, stuff like that. But so we have a mentat or a scholiast taking the place as Hadrian's primary teacher. And
not to just immediately jump into all the Dune references that you and I love, but clearly the scholiasts are the ones that have this sort of aphorisms like the Bene Gesserit do in Dune too. So it's sort of like a mix of the two,
right?
While also being clearly heavily influenced by Stoic philosophy. Talking about Gibson more, he sort of stokes in Hadrian this desire to learn. Hadrian clearly is interested in the Cielsen. We'll talk about that a lot, but he also is interested in language and a love for words, right? And so we're seeing that here as he's dictating this incredibly eloquent account, because like in universe, this document isn't written by Christopher Ruocchio, it's written by Hadrian.
Hadrian.
So Hadrian clearly has a love for this prose that we're seeing here. And it's very clear that Gibson has sort of instilled that in him, not only in his whatever his language is, which we don't know yet, but also in other languages that we're finding out, like Mandar, or like he mentions the fire poetry of Jad. So Jad has their own language too.
Yep.
And he says that the most important thing that Gibson taught him about was like his language of the Cielsen, which clearly, even before the book started, we're like, okay, this guy clearly has a relationship with this other race in this war that humanity has. And so we need to keep an eye out for where Gibson is teaching him about the Cielsen, and just a little tiny bit thing here that's harkening back to who the Cielsen are, even before we get to see one in the book. The marauding alien scourge chewing at the edges of civilization. Just such beautiful imagery. We'll talk about Cielsen eating habits not too far from now, but chewing at the edges of civilization just gives such wonderful imagery of, okay, they're on the outside of the empire, just nibbling, trying to make their way in. So they've been this sort of like Viking-esque force.
Yeah.
Raiders almost.
Yeah, it almost implies too that they're not just chewing in the physical location at the edge of the universe. It's almost like chewing at the fabric of holding the whole thing together, right? Like there's like this assumption that sort of develops from the language that this isn't just like a little battle's going over. Like this could like a genuine problem for human civilization, that these things are eating us or something like that. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Double entendres there is fantastic.
Yes.
So something that we should probably keep in mind too is I'm not too familiar with, Joseph Campbell and like the monomyth, but that he's talked about, or the sort of like hero with 1,000 faces framework. But if we were to like fit that onto this story, then Gibson is like clearly the Magus or the wizard, the Merlin that sort of guides Arthur to the sword, the Ben Kenobi, the Obi-Wan Kenobi to Luke Skywalker-esque figure, the desert arcane person that our Hadrian is clearly the most influenced by of any character we've met up to this point. And then he writes at the very end of this section, I can only hope the history books will not damn him for it. He's like, I think the world of this person, and I know that he's going to be blamed because of the actions that I've taken. And that's so sad already. It's very sad.
Yeah. And, now we're sort of present in the plot a little bit. And, Gibson is like, listen, I need to talk to you, Hadrian. But ends up saying like, all right, listen, I can talk to you later, because Hadrian's called to actually go training with his brother.
Yeah, he's stretching in the training hall about to like spar, and his teacher's like, hey, can we talk about something? And he's like,
I got sword fight, brother.
Yeah, I'm about to hit my brother with the sword.
That's right. Yeah. And immediately we get interesting, more in-universe stuff. It's interesting is in these first chapters, everything is like, oh, this is a rule about the universe. Oh, this is a rule about this is another thing. Sword fighting, apparently relevant. We're told that it is important in part because dueling is important for Palatine political stability. So like we have duels taking place rather than gigantic problems. High matter is mentioned for the first time here. Crispin sets his sword on his shoulder and is very rapidly lectured like, listen, if that was high matter, that would have like taken your arm off or something like that. So,
yeah, the idea of like putting a lightsaber on your shoulder like you would a sword, you'd burn yourself, right? Same idea.
And high matter is not exactly a lightsaber, but it is kind of interesting. And as we sort of see that happen in this universe, we'll sort of explore what that means more. But put a pin in high matter, it's really cool. We also get the introduction of Royce shields in this universe, which are similar but slightly different to the shields in the Dune universe. They're roughly the same because it means sword fighting can take place, because you can't just get shot, because if you shoot a shield, it doesn't go through, right? But you can swing a sword in, and that's slow enough to hit a person.
It's an excuse, and Ruocchio has mentioned it's an excuse a lot of science fiction authors have used to say, I want to write sword fights, I don't want to write gunfights, because they're lame and sword fights are more personal and cool.
And he's absolutely right, and they're awesome. And something that I think is interesting for people that are familiar with Dune is that, and you have to correct me on this if I'm wrong, they're slightly different than Dune shields in that my understanding is that the rule in Dune is the slow blade goes through the shield. In this, you basically can swing as hard as you want, you can't move fast enough to be deflected by the shield. So you can have a full speed sword fight in this universe, and it still goes through the shield. You just can't be picked off by a sniper while you're having the sword fight, which is a really cool in-universe way to have fast, exciting fights without being picked off from afar. So really cool. So slightly different than doing stuff.
Better, in my opinion, if I'm
I
being
agree.
honest.
I
Yeah.
completely agree. Yes.
So as we sort of get into this thing, he's practicing, they're getting ready to spar, they're doing exercises and drills, but there was a piece of it before they get into the actual sparring and him and Crispin really, really fighting each other that I wanted to point out that is related to martial arts. So Drew he won't admit it, he's very good at jujitsu. He's very, very good at jujitsu. Won multiple tournaments. He's a big dude and is very extremely technical. I know because he's choked me more times than I can count.
Good Lord.
But I thought, but in the same sort of like, what do they talk about in jujitsu? Put your jujitsu hat on real quick as I read you this piece, because the realism that Ruocchio has. I think Ruocchio had trained boxing a little bit too in his
fencing
spare
too,
time.
I think, right?
Fencing previously as well.
Yep.
So he has some understanding of martial arts that is clearly outlined here that I wanted to point out. In particular, he says, in legend, the hero is almost always taught to fight by some sunstruck hermit, some mystic who sets his pupils to chasing cats, cleaning vehicles, and writing poetry. So, one, he shouts out Karate Kid like immediately, right?
Yeah,
like
right, for sure.
He says, wax on, wax off is bullshit.
Right. Yeah. And it is. It is.
It is, because he immediately says, not I. Under Felix, my education was a rigor of unending drills. Many hours a day I spent in his care learning how to hold my own. No mysticism, only practice, long and tedious, until the motions of lunge and parry were as easy as breathing. So, like, how much of drilling, as the expert martial artist here, how much more important is drilling than, well, more so than me?
Yeah. Well, I think so. If you're thinking from a martial arts perspective, just my experience has been, you have like sort of like a multiple phase to learning and gaining proficiency in something. You have like step one, which is like instructor shows you thing, you observe thing, you try to ingest and absorb thing, and then you go and you train it without resistance, practice it, you drill it, you go through it several times so your body knows how it feels. You will do this for a certain number of reps over time. You then start sparring, which is what they're doing in this situation, against more intense live force so that you can implement the thing that you've been drilling against actual resistance, right? And so that's exactly what we're doing here. He's talking like, this is deliberate. We're training. This isn't a magical thing. I'm not like wiping things down to learn. I am training with a sword for hours a day, and I'm sparring with my brother, who is, by the way, mentioned to be very large compared to Hadrian, which is really interesting. He mentions that he is grateful for training against his brother because he learned to fight against people that were so much larger and stronger than him, because the Cielsen are larger and stronger than him. Yeah. I love this. So apparently they're mentioned to be at the minimum 2 meters tall. I didn't know what that meant. I looked up, it's like 6.5 feet tall is the smallest of the Cielsen, which is pretty wild.
Like 8 or 9, I think, throughout the series, right?
Yeah, it's huge. Crazy. It's crazy. So this is really cool. Again, we're just giving another drip of an interesting fact about the Cielsen, and then we're just moving right on. So it's great. Yeah, I love the drip feed.
For reference for us, they're like the tallest basketball players in the NBA and super skinny from what we see, right? Like it's the idea of fighting one of them. Like imagine sword fighting a basketball player. Like that would be terrifying.
It'd be terrifying.
And you're at such a disadvantage, right? But he says that his training with Crispin prepared him to be in that sort of disadvantage. And one thing too, going back to the martial arts aspect of it, something that I had learned in training and just my fandom of MMA is how important angles are, right? In martial arts and finding openings and being able to like capitalize on different moves and things like that, cutting an angle in jiu-jitsu or stepping an angle or moving an angle in order to get a strike in, right? Crispin, he talks about him generating angles here when he says Crispin boiled up the line, blade tucked back to put the power of his elbow and shoulder behind it. And the other piece of it too that I love too is, and he's not even mentioning it, it says, I saw the blow coming from light years away and ducked under it as it whistled over my head. So telegraphing is also a huge thing in martial arts too, right? You don't want to
Yes.
telegraph. You want to be deceptive, use feints and things like that. But clearly, Crispin is this. Not only are we seeing one, Rockio is actually knows what he's talking about with martial arts, but two, like Crispin is this huge raging bull that
Yeah.
is gonna, like Mike Tyson-esque. I'm gonna rush you down and I'm going to beat you with power. Um,
Have you heard Rockio talk about how he choreographs his fights?
no,
So I was watching him discuss this. I believe he was asked this in a Q&A section. I think it may have been for when he was announcing and a reading from Ashes of Man, which is a book 5. He said that he keeps a cane in his office and stands up in his office and acts out the sword fight to make sure it practically works. And he said that the roof of his office is covered in skid marks from swinging the cane all over the place, which is just the
I
best
love
thing.
that.
Well, it speaks to when you read a fight in here, it feels reasonable and real because he's standing up in his office like a loon bag, doing the thing and embodying it and making sure it makes sense, which is
That
really
needs to
cool.
be a YouTube video. That
Yeah,
I need.
it
Hope
has to.
he's
It
got
has.
footage.
I know. I need to go find the clip of him talking about that because it's one of the coolest things I've ever heard an author say about trying to choreograph. I want to go back to the details of the fight because I think there's something that's important and highlighted about Hadrian as a person and his personality and the way that this fight is going on is that it's highlighted routinely or frequently in this sparring with his brother that he will not commit to finishing blows while he's sparring. He sort of lacks conviction in his fighting.
But
He
he
doesn't.
gets to the right spot, right? Like
Yes.
in that passage, it says, "Spinning, I came back to guard at Crispin's right with the perfect angle to strike at his exposed back and shoulder." But he just like nudges him instead, right? And he plays with his food a little bit, but also, Felix, like you said, mentions to him that like you had the perfect shot and you didn't take it. And
Yeah.
in a real fight, if you're not taking it, you're dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just really, really interesting. It also like this fight plays out like Crispin Hadrian is a better fighter than Crispin, right? Even though he's smaller, he uses his speed and agility and his knowledge of angles, and clearly he drills. I think it mentions even earlier that he trains without shoes on because like that's more realistic and like that's going to give him some advantage in some
Yeah.
stance, maybe balance. I don't know. That's probably true to some extent. I mean,
Yep.
think about
Yeah.
training martial arts
Yeah.
in your bare feet to give you better balance and things like that. But he gets the better of Crispin for most of this time because Crispin is just the same bum rush. I'm going to use my size advantage on you to win this fight. And Felix keeps calling Hadrian out for not, going harder
Not
and
right.
hitting him enough.
Do you have a thought on what psychologically is going on with Hadrian here that he's not jumping into attacking Crispin and just finishing it? Is it a not finishing it thing? Is it the fact that he's his brother? Do you know what is going on here? Because I actually not quite sure.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't like Crispin at all. He
Right.
hates Crispin, right? We'll find out more and more that he does not have a good relationship with Crispin. So I don't think it's like out of mercy.
I don't think it is either.
I think
Yeah.
it's partially playing with your food, but also I don't know. I really don't know.
I'm wondering if there's just like there is like almost this lack of being sure of himself, like this almost like not being able to. So he sees the opportunity but doesn't jump on it because he's just not doesn't have this self assurance underneath him. It's almost like present, and this will get touched on in chapters 2 and 3. Is there's this underlying insecurity going on with him that may be manifesting itself not just in the way that he feels about being the heir or any of these things, but like actually jumping into things when he has the opportunity to finish things, do the right thing. He just doesn't have the strength of his convictions right now at the start of the story.
And I think to that point too, I think it also says that like I don't know if he necessarily has the killer instinct.
Yeah,
he
I
knows
agree.
exactly what to do. He
Yeah.
gets in the exact right position in the exact right spot. And to
And he
him,
won't.
at least in his mind, that's good enough to consider him better than at least in his like, perception of himself and Crispin. He's better than Crispin. He's fine. But maybe there's some aspect of like not being able to close it or not like knowing the exact thing to do but not actually doing it
Yeah.
being related to him not being a killer at this point, right? Like
Yeah.
he hasn't been in a real fight. He's only been in this scenario, which is a real interesting contrast from literally the guy who killed billions of people on page one, right?
Yep.
So I
Doesn't
think
have the
it's
courage to strike down.
exactly
Yep.
right.
It's pretty amazing.
How can that person then destroy billions of lives? It's just interesting to see how much different of a young man Hadrian is than
Yeah.
Hadrian at the end of the story.
Yeah. And anything else that you think is relevant for chapter 1 before we dive into chapter 2?
Yeah, I think we just finished the story. So for the majority of it, Crispin is
Yeah.
not as good as Hadrian. Hadrian dodges him, but then, like Felix says, he doesn't take the final strike. At one point, they square off, and he goes. Crispin gets the better of him after charging. Hadrian tries to sweep to his right. He realizes he's too late, and then Crispin hits him and gets him. In a very, very, I recommend everybody read it. The fight scenes are really, really good. We're never going to do it justice short of reading it, which we don't have
Yep.
time for.
Yep.
But essentially, he gets distracted by Sir Felix in the midst of like he calls out Crispin's name just as he's about to like attack Hadrian, and then he stops for a second, and then Crispin finally gets the better of him and like knocks the wind out of Hadrian, hits him on the floor.
Hmm.
And he says, "You got lucky, brother." His thick lips quirked into that jagged smile. He threw a kick. So even when Hadrian's down, he throws a kick at him in the ribs.
Mhm.
Hadrian winces as he's grasping for air. But Hadrian ignores him as Crispin's complaining, like, "Oh, if I fought fair." Crispin sees Hadrian's fighting style as not honorable, clearly.
Mm.
And then as Crispin turns away, Hadrian hooks his leg, and then like he falls flat on his face. He steps on his back and taps him on the side of the head with his sword. So it's just like, oh, okay, the older brother.
It's a brother scene. Yeah, it's a brother scene. Yeah.
As the eldest brother who has a younger brother, the middle child who's bigger than me, I totally get where this is coming from, man. I would totally want the last laugh. You want to prove you're better. And so that I love the fact that he ends up like on Crispin's back and taps him on the side of the head saying, "I still am better than you.
Pretty great.
Don't be confused."
Yeah.
So,
man. It's amazing. Chapter 2?
chapter 2, like distant thunder.
Yes. This is going to be leaning into that theme we were talking about. Things being sort of far away, not feeling with the intensity that we should have.
Yeah.
But so we're starting out. We're given a little bit more background about Scholiast here at the start. You know, they're revealed the council emperors, which is sort of like another amalgamation of Scholiast and Bene Gesserit kind of stuff. They've got restrictions on technology as well, which is interesting, and that's partly why they read so many books. So there's a library kind of thing present going on where they read a lot more. They don't have data in the same way that we would right now as on our computers, stuff like that.
If you have perfect recall, which we'll see, this is
Yep.
them demonstrate that later, then books, and you're only allowed essentially to have books and maybe some film and some data storage things I think he mentions, but like if books are your main source of information and you have the ability to recall them at any point, then they are super precious, right? I think he talks about how like the bookshelves are bursting almost in Gibson's cloister. It goes into a little bit to talking about the injunctions against them. And this is the first sort of mention that we get some more context about how technology is sort of stratified in the society, right? It essentially mentions that, okay, the chantry are the key holders, the Earth's holy chantry, they're called here, which is specifically talking about, they are the gatekeepers for the noble houses having access to technology, and they're the ones imposing this sort of extra strict rule on the scholiasts to say, hey, you're not allowed anything. So there's a conflicting relationship, an antagonistic relationship between the scholiasts and the chantry, as we'll see. And maybe potentially even the chantry and some of the imperial houses, because they are in control of literally all technology.
Yeah. And one line that I thought was interesting is that the scholiasts are revealed to be old enough to be around since the death of the Americanii machine lords that died 16,000 years ago, which is kind of like dropping a bomb in the middle of this page. Like what the heck is a Americanii machine lord? I mean, like, it's just this huge thing, sort of implied to be part of the reason that there are all these weird rules is like, hey, there's like these machine lords going on 16,000 years ago. And so we have to be really strict, especially with people like these scholiasts, because they're sort of like leaning in this direction and stuff. It's also revealed that Hadrian wants to be a scholiast like Gibson, which is sort of an interesting thing for a guy who ends up being the Sun Eater. Starts off wanting to be effectively a mentat. Yeah, very different direction. We're getting this character that's sort of unsure of himself, not striking people down, wants to be a scholiast, wants to study, wants to read books, study language. Apparently begged Gibson to teach him Cielson. It's mentioned here. I thought another thing that was interesting as I was reading through chapter 2 is that privacy is revealed to be kind of a problem in this universe. Like there's this paranoia present about the things they're discussing, and it's relevant. Like we have this chantry that's over everything. It's like also this sort of feeling of like, hey, hush, hush, be careful what you say. We don't know who's listening. It's sort of present even in this place where it shouldn't be an issue. It's sort of lays the groundwork for
It'll come
that
up
dynamic.
a lot, right?
Yeah,
In the
it's
next
super
two
important.
chapters too.
Yep.
I wanted to focus on too, at least as he's talking about wanting to be a scholiast too. Not only does he want to be a scholiast, he wants to be like this idealized version of a scholiast that he has in his head, which is this sort of hero out of myth. I think the one that gets mentioned most out of the entire series is Simeon the Red, who was this like mythical scholiast or mythical hero that we'll find out more about later, that was this explorer, adventurer, this sort of like, what's the name of John Carter of Mars or whatever, I think it's called, this old
Yeah.
science fiction story of this guy sort of like, it's analogous to a lot of like the myth that Herbert plays with a little bit of like Paul going to be the liberator of the Fremen. The same idea with John Carter was that he goes to liberate the inhabitants of Mars and then becomes king. Simeon the Red is a similar figure on that. And I found a line really, really interesting that he said too, is like he wants all his questions answered in this mastery. Like wanted answers to all my questions in the command of things secret and arcane. So he like puts the Scholiast on this pedestal of like he wants all of the answers to all of the questions of the universe that he could potentially have. And I mean, there's this idea of like knowledge, like gnosis, or this knowledge being hidden, like the most important knowledge in the universe being hidden to some extent, and the most powerful people in the universe could access that. I mean, that's the wizard trope, and so he wants to be that sort of wizard. But it also tells us that he has this like really, at this point, childlike idealism where
Yeah.
he thinks that he believes he can achieve that still. He hasn't been broken down by the world enough to think, or lived in the world in a realistic fashion enough. He's lived essentially his whole life in this castle and in this town where he thinks that I could be important enough to find out these sort of secrets at the center of the universe.
Yep.
But he's
Gigantic
like,
dreams.
he's 19 years old, right? Like
Right.
he has
Right.
not really had any experience, which we'll find out later, in the eyes of like a Palatine, which will come up.
Dad is 300.
Yeah, Dad's 300 years old and doesn't look 300 years old. Like
Yep.
19 years is nothing in the life of a Palatine.
Yep.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it's great, and we'll be looking forward to getting more into Simeon and like stories and stuff as we get more into those as the book goes on and stuff. Gibson tells Hadrian that a retinue has arrived at Hadrian's home because the Cielson have destroyed Kai-Shen.
Yeah.
And Kai-Shen is mentioned to be politically important because House Marlowe is now going to be slated to be the largest supplier of uranium in the universe. So there's been a gigantic, essentially political shift because of something that happened in the war very far away at Kai-Shen. Something else, as they're having a conversation, and we'll get back to Kai-Shen in a second, they're switching language as they're talking. They're switching to Jadian, which we don't even know what that means yet, but Hadrian is following this. So this is sort of just demonstrating Hadrian is not just a student. He is fluent enough to go back and forth with his tutor in a different language, moving here and there throughout. And so he's got really mastery over this.
He's not very good at language.
He's not casually dipping into the language thing. This is important to him. He's good at it. He can switch back and forth between them. Have
you ever seen a video of like two polyglots like talking to each other? Like they do challenges where it's like, okay, don't repeat a language, right? Like it's like one will speak a language to the other and then will answer in a different language. That's essentially what they're doing here. Recommend everybody to go look up at one of those videos because it really sort of paints this picture that Ruocchio is trying to show of like they're just switching at like a drop of it. He's a polyglot. He speaks a ton of languages. enough
Yep.
conversationally.
Yep.
Some interesting pieces, little bits that I picked up in the conversation. So QET is mentioned, right? The QET wave only arrived a few months ago. The consortium diverted from its usual trade routes to make the trip. So this group is coming in, but the QET wave specifically, which I think is related to quantum entanglement, right? Like this idea of like because of the vastness of space, there's like physics theories that essentially say the quantum theories that mention that if you were to entangle, so I think it's like quantum entanglement transmission is what QET stands for. I could be wrong.
Mm.
But if you entangle two particles, essentially you could have real time or close to real time communication across vastly
Vast.
wide parts of space, which is really interesting because it tells us like I don't know. We're fans of all kind of sci-fi, but we're also fans of soft sci-fi too. Ruocchio is really riding a good line of like
Yeah.
not getting too much bogged down in because some of those books that like some of the hard sci-fi books, it works in like The Martian works really well
Yeah.
with hard and fast sci-fi rules. Like Andy Weir is like very much a hard sci-fi guy, and Herbert is like screw all that. We're doing mystic space
Yeah. And
drugs, you know?
Rocchio's is like, it's a QT wave. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's kind of an
subtly.
explanation, but it's also kind of just, this is how we did it.
But he makes it just plausible enough to where
Right.
like I'm not getting bogged because I'm not a physics major. I enjoy learning some things about science and things like that. But some of those like harder sci-fi books get really bogged down, and some of the soft sci-fi books get really, really weird,
Yep.
or just like
He rides a
shrug it
great
off.
line where it's just like, it feels good enough to be real, but doesn't cause so much friction that you don't know what's going on.
Exactly.
And so that's a great example of that. Great example of that.
But not only that, so like we also pick up where we mentioned earlier, right at the very beginning of the book, if we go back to this sort of vague Sanskrit-esque language, we can assume, and we'll find out for sure later, that this language that is written here is Galstani, because Galstani is the first thing that this is the first time Galstani gets mentioned in the whole book. So we can
Mm.
assume like this script is Galstani, and that it's like a portmanteau of like galaxy and like Pakistani or something from, South Asia or whatever,
Mm.
which would give us the, vaguely
Fantastic.
Sanskrit piece.
Yeah.
So there's so much little things that he puts in here.
Yeah.
Another thing I noticed about Kai Shen, going back to the story. So essentially, Gibson is telling him, "Hey, these people are looking for uranium. We'll find out the importance of uranium as a resource in the not too distant future. I think in chapter 3 we'll start talking about it. But Kai Shen has just been attacked.
Mm.
Kai Shen, the name, like it gets destroyed by the Cielson, and the Wong Hopper consortium needs like a new source of uranium for their terraforming, essentially, because Kai Shen, we'll talk about Wong Hopper a little bit more as we get to meet those people, but like they are involved in the terraforming of planets, which is clearly an important thing as you're trying to broaden and expand a
Mm.
galactic empire and make a world inhabitable for humans. The name Kai Shen might refer to a Chinese mythological or religious figure who is known as the god of wealth, which is often invoked in Chinese New Year celebrations. So,
That's
like,
great.
these names that he's picking are not like there are
Not
reasons,
random.
they're
Yeah.
not random. It's
Yeah.
spelled the same way, just with no space. And obviously, we don't speak Mandarin or read Mandarin, so that however you Romanize it doesn't really matter. But like I think this is a clear reference of like, okay, their cash cow, like this planet that's very, and if you go look back in the back of the book, let's look at the it mentions the index of worlds, Kai Shen. And so I recommend everybody, like these last like 50 pages are, if you're ever tripped up by a word, Rockio has written not only a definition for it, but a definition in universe, which may be slightly different than what we have in our world.
Mm.
And so we'll see some of those differences as we dig into some of those words. But if you ever have a question, just go read it. It's in the very back of the book. Flip back and forth because that's going to make you could probably figure out with context, but
Yeah.
it makes the experience going through it again a lot more interesting. So he says, Kaishen, an ethnically Mandari world in the Imperium famed for its Bashang temple. It was ruled by House Min Chen until ISD 16130 when it was destroyed by the Cielcin. So like So we know that they're related to the Mandar, which we can assume. So this is not only is the name related to Chinese, right? But Mandar is close to Mandarin, right? So they're the
Mm,
inheritors. Like a lot of these languages too, there's an inheritance stemming from our world. Even later in the paragraph when he goes back to Lothrian, he says Da. So that tells us like before we learn anything about Lothrian that oh okay, this is the Russian analog that he's done because he's got a
yeah,
Chinese analog in Mandar. We don't know about Jad 2 yet, but we can assume that that will be one.
yeah,
Galstani, we figured out that is some sort of analog to a historical future South Asian
mm,
language, etc.
mm,
And now Gibson has basically told Hadrian that they're coming to your dad because they need uranium, right?
yeah. And I think there's this great line that's mentioned in here. It's the best quote of the chapter. It's the namesake of the chapter, and that is strange, isn't it? How the greatest disasters in history often feel hollow and abstract like distant thunder. A single death, wrote one ancient king, is a tragedy, but a genocide can only be understood through statistics. What a
It's genius
Yeah, it's genius. Yeah.
because he's speaking in Lothrian too, right? So this like goes back to Lothrian being an analog for Russian.
Mm,
The ancient king that he mentions in this line, a single death wrote one ancient king is a tragedy, but a genocide can only be understood through statistics, is a quote that is normally attributed to Stalin, right? And it's slightly different than the one that we hear in English today. It's a single death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic, is like the
yep.
quote. We don't know if Stalin actually said that, but like they're speaking in the future Russian, talking about Stalin, this
Pretty
ancient
wild.
king, is genius, which totally missed my
Yeah.
first read through.
I didn't even
Totally
catch that
missed
this
it.
time around. I saw your notes and I was like, that's pretty amazing that you caught
Yeah.
that. It's
Yeah.
pretty amazing. I think at the end of this chapter, we have all this information that's revealed to us by Gibson. We're switching languages. We're getting a lot of context about that. And it's revealed that Hadrian was left out of this information, but Crispin was not. So Crispin is
Intentionally.
intentionally. So this is once again playing into this. This is the crux of where this sort of is narratively most obviously thrust at, is that there is going to be a division between Crispin and Hadrian and how he's being treated by his father. And this is going to lead us into the future chapters here. This is going to be the thrust of the initial sort of conflict of our story here. And
Crispin is now not only his rival on the dueling court, but now his rival for heirdom, potentially.
politically, yep, that's right. And that's most of chapter 2. Do you have any other notes for chapter 2? Is quite short, but quite important.
Going back to your point of privacy is like the whole point of them switching languages is in the hopes that they know that there are no cameras inside of the Scholiast cloister because there's no tech, but they're switching languages in the event that somebody's got like their ear to the door, so that potentially when Gibson's breaking rules by because Gibson was specifically ordered not to tell Hadrian this information, but he does because he cares for him. And then Hadrian, being stupid, is like goes back to his like Galstani. It's like, but I'm his heir, Gibson. He shouldn't. It's just like, okay, well, if you were doing all that language stuff just to, obfuscate, you're an idiot for switching back to the equivalent of English in the event that somebody is actually listening. But
Right,
whatever.
right.
Yeah,
Chapter
it's
3,
yeah, chapter 3.
consortium. So Hadrian is banned in preparation for this meeting. Stay out. You're not allowed.
Yeah, he's not even
Yeah.
supposed to know about it. That's
Right.
how banned he is, right?
Yeah. Right. Exactly. And um, sort of starts this whole other side quest thing that's going on. That's interesting.
Yeah, but I mean, we'll talk about the
Mhm.
instructions his dad gave him to do it in just a minute, but like he's not supposed to know about it, but then again, like for the first time in months, like the castle is being prepared for like this huge thing. So it's like,
Right.
how do you even hide? I don't know. I think it's kind of dumb that
It's
like he would know that important people are coming because the servants are doing like getting out the fine china, right?
well, I mean, imagine how you're feeling if you're Hadrian, right? It's
Yeah.
do you think I'm so dumb that I don't see what's going on? Like, it's happening right in front of his face, and it's almost illogical for Dad to expect Hadrian to not be upset and furious about this because he's doing it
Yeah.
right in front of his nose,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
it's like it's like what are we doing here? It's intentional.
Petty.
It's petty. Yeah. Dad feels petty at this point, at least from the perspective of Hadrian. You know, this is his account, so we'll see.
And not only that, so he says like, okay, the castle couldn't hide it anymore because like clearly these people are close or whatever. And he goes on to describe some of these like corporations, like these huge business people that are known galaxy round. I think he mentions even that like these institutions transcended the boundaries of our empire and bound the human universe together. So even outside of the bounds of the empire, these institutions are important. So not only do they do business in the empire, but they also do business outside of,
Oh,
excuse me, the
yeah.
empire. And just a little piece I just picked up was like even in far-flung Jad, right? So okay, Jad's not part of the empire, right? I didn't pick that up either, literally on
Yeah.
our second read through.
Yeah.
But I wanted to get into the names of some of
Definitely.
these corporations or institutions that he mentions. The first one that we will meet shortly is the Wong Hopper Consortium, which is the largest of, in the definition in the book, is the largest of the Mandari trading corporations, holding several governmental contracts, especially in terraforming. So, right, we've got confirmation in the book's lexicon saying that these are the, if you want to populate a planet, Wong Hopper's going to be there first to terraform it. We can know that Mandari is close enough to, it's like Mandarin minus one letter, right? So we can know it's some inheritance of Chinese culture and things like that. The name maybe, so Rockio has like the Roy Seals that you mentioned. I don't think is like a friend of Rockio's that he named the shields after, like for potential physical theory or something like that. He wants to throw, Gibson obviously is one of his best friends in real life. So I couldn't really find anything on Hopper other than potentially Grace Hopper, who was like a naval rear admiral and pioneer of computer science.
Hmm.
But so maybe a friend of Rockio's that he's like shouting out here. And maybe Wong is too, but Wong could mean a lot of different things depending on the character in Chinese. It could mean gold, or it could mean king, or it could mean the Yellow River, the Wong River, which is big in Chinese culture, the second largest river in China, and would also be associated with not only religion, but this sort of wealth. So
Hmm.
these are like big money trading
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Yamato Interstellar. He's Rockio is showing his anime nerdness here because Yamato comes in anime a lot. It's like a huge Yamato is like basically a Japanese spirit, like this sort of like the culture of Japan is like the Yamato spirit and things like that. It's deeply ingrained in like the like one of the titles of the Emperor of Japan is the King of Yamato, which is like an archaic name for the country. Um, it also, in our world, was the name of the battleship of the Japanese fleet during World War II that struck at Pearl Harbor. Like the flagship was the
Hmm.
battleship Yamato. And there's a really cheesy but great anime from the 70s that has a remake, I think, done in the 2010s called Space Battleship Yamato, um, which also is potentially the reference as well. But clearly, this is the Japanese analog, right? Like they're in the book's definition, they're an interstellar manufacturing company owned by House Yamato and based out of Nichibotsu, which means sunset in Japanese as well.
Hmm.
So it's Mitsubishi in space, essentially, or something like along those lines, but like with more cultural samurai
Sure.
intelligence. He made like a super big Japanese corporation to put in space as well. The Rothsbank. Are you familiar with like the Rothschilds and the history of like that family and how they basically held up all of banking in Europe forever?
I've heard Rothschild, but I have no knowledge of that, but
Okay.
I've heard people utter that phrase before.
So the definition in the book is for the Rothsbank is an ancient privately owned banking house tracing its roots back to the golden age of Earth. So like the
Wow.
Rothsbank is specifically the inheritors of like the Rothschild fortune, which is a family of Ashkenazi Jewish bankers that were originally from Frankfurt that were elevated to Holy Roman and UK royalty. So like they doubled up on royalty, and not only are we Protestant royalty, but we're Catholic royalty too. And during the 19th century, so the 1800s, they had the largest private fortune in the world. They are so important in like all of European history, essentially. From that point on, they helped fund the Suez Canal.
Hmm.
They started the Rhodes Scholarship Program at Oxford, and they're like, even on the Wikipedia page, you'll read like 5 straight paragraphs about like financial crises in Europe, in France, and in the UK that were like averted because the Rothsbank. It's like the Iron Bank almost from Bravos, right? But
Wow.
held by a family. Like they kept Europe afloat for many years.
Wow.
Like clearly in this world and universe, these are some of the largest institutions and corporations that are dealing with. So now that we know that one of those four that are mentioned here, which span the entire galaxy, is coming, oh, we're not dealing with, you know, mom and pop local corp in our area of the galaxy. We're
Right.
dealing with like JP Morgan or like
Major player.
huge player, market maker, but at a galactic scale, which
Right.
I can't even
Right.
process
How do
how
you even
big.
comprehend that? Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a very important meeting that's about to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah. As a result of Kai Shen falling because of this war, we're sort
Yeah.
of thrust into to relevancy here. Yeah. And so Hadrian is sort of thrust into this situation where he's meeting with the mining guild now in this representative. And this is a really interesting interaction here. You know, we have him thrust into this situation. He's sort of given needs, told, and he tolerates a lot more than would be expected of his position. Just the way that the person talks to him, the demands that they make, he lets it slide in a way that people would not typically. And I actually, interestingly enough, how do you feel? There's a way to read this, which is Hadrian is being like almost merciful. Like he's not stomping these people with his station like he could. There's another way to read it where he's like tolerating stuff that he genuinely should not tolerate. Like he's like letting things go that should not be let go. Like there's multiple ways. And how do you feel like he is in this scene? Is he just doing like the merciful right thing? He shouldn't be stomping on these people at this station, or do you feel like no, he's actually letting things pass that he should not be tolerating from like a naive way? Like he thinks he's doing the first thing when he's actually doing the second thing. He's letting things slide that he should not be letting slide.
I think he's doing both. And for some context too, in this situation, this, like you mentioned, this is a side quest that his dad has sort of set him on, right? This is a meeting that normally, like she even mentions her
Yeah, it
name's Lena
does.
Bellum. She's a plebeian. So we're getting this like picture of this social system, the caste system, and the distance between him and her, right? She doesn't have genetic modification. She's like 40 years old, twice his age, and it looks old, and he like mentions it. So like they are very different people. He is nobility,
Yeah.
she is not. She's at the bottom of society, but she's an important person at that bottom of society. She's like the head of a union, essentially. Um, this meeting theoretically would have been important enough for his dad to go to. So even though it looks like it's a side quest that he's being sent on to distract him from the bigger meeting, he was going to have this meeting until he found out that, oh, ExxonMobil's coming in town and I need to have this conversation, right?
Right. Right.
So it may be too much for Hadrian too. So going back to your question about reading into it, she's kind of rude with him. She doesn't like use the right terms. She doesn't call him sire. She says that's not good enough. She gets clearly frustrated with him. He like they mentioned that like he picks up something that she drops on the floor and like a palatine or a noble would never do that for whatever. The guards in the room are like about to beat this woman and Hadrian's like back off, like no, she's
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
So to answer your question, I think it's a mix of both. I think naivety is probably the biggest one, right? Hadrian is clearly not prepared for the situation as much as he should be. Granted, it probably was more short notice than he was expecting, but he's trying to be empathetic with this woman. He makes it, Hadrian calls out and specifically says, like, I was trying to show pathos to this woman. I was actually surprised with how much I was showing. And there's times where he actually flips back and says, like, he does show that he's like different than her. Mostly it's the guards, but like there's one or two moments that he does. She's basically complaining about all our equipment is shit, right? Like it's all gone to shit. We have nothing. I'm supposed to mine this uranium. We'll find out later, like how important uranium on the planet versus outside of the planet in the system is in terms of output. She's saying like we have like people working 13-hour shifts with like pickaxes trying to do this stuff, and they're dying of cancer. So it's not a
It's
light
real,
issue.
real,
It's a
real
real
complaints.
problem. It's a
Yeah.
real problem. These people are dying. But the other side of it too is like they don't have the industrial equipment. And presumably based on the conversation that we had previously about the way that the chantry works and things like that, we don't know what that's like yet in terms of, okay, how do you fix an industrial sized mining thing? So she's like clearly at her wit's end. She's probably had friends die and all this different stuff as part of this. And that you could feel her desperation so much so that she like is disregarding stuff that she probably knows. She's probably had meetings with her father, like his father before, and she may be taking advantage of the fact that it's not dad.
Right, right. And that's the thing that was sort of coming up in my head, is that it probably is a combination of those things, but my suspicion is that even with these circumstances, she would not speak to Alistair this way, because she would know you can't do that and get away with it. But Hadrian's different. Hadrian tolerates it more than he should, probably, even though the concerns are genuine. And that may have consequences, given just what he allows to happen, things he says in this meeting.
It will have consequences directly later in the story.
Right, right. And he, I believe, makes some specific statements about things that can happen. I'm not recalling what exactly if he commits to something specific or not.
So I went back and looked at this because his dad brings it up again later. We'll talk about that more in episode 2. But he's, from Hadrian's perspective, what he's saying is, I'll do the best that I can. I'll talk to my dad. I'll try and help you out. I recognize the position you're in, trying to show compassion and things like that. But that wasn't the instruction he was given by his dad. His dad said, give them nothing, right? Like, you are there to listen. You are there to say that, sorry, we can't do anything about it. And he's not doing that. He's not following his dad's instructions.
Yep.
It also, like, she keeps like hammering this home, and the guards keep like saying, yo, this is the son of Lord Alistair Marlowe. And the moment like dad's name comes up, she like gets pale white, knowing that, this information's gonna get to dad and I might be in trouble. And Hadrian, I think even later, is like, yeah, I know that she's gonna get like whipped in the street and put up in the stocks and stuff like that, just by hearing how this meeting went. So good for her for like not caring about decorum and putting her safety on the line in the hopes that she can save other people. But in the long run, she's going to feel the pain for it, is what it sort of intimates. But when I looked at it, Hadrian doesn't give her anything for sure, but gives her enough openness for her to go back to her people and say they have committed to giving us something.
Yeah.
But I didn't see anything like they're not going to fix any of the miners. Right. Hadrian recognizes too, like, we should fix some of this stuff. Like it doesn't make sense. Like,
yep. And I'm just noticing that he attempts to be like, listen, I'll talk to my dad, that thing, and he tries to leave. And there's this, that's not good enough. Like there's like this, like this is where like it's interesting, because she earlier at the mention of Alistair realizes, okay, I need to calm down and I need to apologize. Hadrian sort of lets it slide and says, hey, listen, I'll talk to my dad. And it's almost like as if she recognizes he doesn't have the capacity to behave like his father. And so she pushes further and does this. It's like, listen, your promise doesn't worth anything. It's like she just keeps doubling down on the risk factor because she's identified that Hadrian is not actually his dad, even though the guards threat.
From her perspective too, it's life or death for these people, right?
Sure.
And she doesn't. Yep. She probably doesn't give two shits about how the Palatines live. They live for 300 years, and they're basically like almost angels, right? They're so distant from humanity. It's not even the same thing from her side. But like from her life, she's seeing people die of cancer. Like, have you seen Chernobyl?
I haven't. I've heard it's amazing.
It's amazing. I recommend everyone watch it. The depictions of how fast the radiation poisoning and cancer kills these people during this reactor implosion is insane. And that's what's happening to these people, because they don't, like, not even talking about the big industrial mining equipment to extract some of this stuff and maybe protect the people better. They don't have suits, like radiation suits. They're all old and torn, and these people are dying of cancer. So from her perspective, maybe she's doing the mental calculus of, okay, I'm not in front of dad, but I may still get in trouble, but I'm not going to get killed for this. Maybe I can still get something. I'm willing to put my body on the line for the potential of some of these other people getting better equipment and things like that. And she's like begging him to stay in the room because it's in her office or whatever. And he just like waltzes out.
Yeah.
And then we get to the next
Notices
part.
he does mention at the end that he feels like, okay, I was too soft. Like I
Yeah.
made I genuinely made a mistake here. Like it wasn't just that I was trying to do the right thing. I actually was not perfect here. I
Yeah.
shouldn't have done it this way. So even
After
he
which it
acknowledges that.
says like Dad's gonna get this woman whipped and put in the stocks, and Crispin would have beaten her himself. So again, he's drawing a dividing line between like the way Crispin would act, aligning with Alistair, even maybe
Yeah.
even more violent, and
Yeah.
the way his father would act compared to what he did. But he also recognizes, like you mentioned, he probably shouldn't have been that
Right. He could
soft
have
on
been
her.
firm. He could have been
Yeah.
firm. Even it was like empathetic but firm. Yeah.
Iron fist in a soft glove.
Yeah, that's right. And then we move on and we have this character, is it Kira or Kyra?
The audiobook says Cairo.
Kyra. And we have, Hadrian doing like flirty stuff
Yeah.
with Kyra.
So as he leaves this meeting, he's leaving this meeting presumably like early.
Yeah.
We'll find out later, to go back home to essentially barge in and show that he knows that the consortium is here, and he's gonna try and he's making a big play by doing this too, right? He is
Mhm.
wanting to not be cut out and see if he can sort of politically maneuver himself back into the situation. So he gets on this flight, and the lieutenant who's like flying him is this attractive young plebeian woman named Kyra. And man, the first attractive woman that gets in front of Hadrian's eyes, he is down so bad. He is
So bad.
he's like a 19-year-old kid. He's like this literal he says he's short, but he's this presumably like 6 foot or 6'3", 6'4",
Yeah.
way taller than this woman. And he doesn't even know how to talk to her. He's just like, I couldn't find something to say. Like awkward first date questions like, you've been a pilot for 4 years? Did you always want to be a soldier? It's like they're sitting across each other from the table at dinner, but she's like flying up flight back, and she's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I've always wanted to fly.
He makes a joke at the end of this too about asking if she wants to trade dads. Is that what this
What a
is?
terrible joke.
I
Yeah.
know. Can you imagine being
My
like,
gosh.
it's like it just like the least smooth thing ever. Like I know I'm nobility and all that, but like, do you want to trade? Like it's got to be the most like,
Cheesy rom-com-y, like
yeah,
the prince who like it's like Princess and the Frog, right? The prince who like goes into the bar and tries to talk to the barmaid, who ends up marrying her later in the story or whatever. It's just like rings of like Hadrian thinks that, oh, this is such a beautiful woman, maybe we'll whatever. It's his naivete, and he just can't talk to this woman even though she's so far down the social structure from him.
oh man,
I think
it's just speaking more to innocence here. He's
yeah.
like a kid. He just doesn't get it. Yeah, it's fun. But then we actually arrive at Devil's Rest again.
I
And
wanted to make one thing here,
go for it.
just a note that I took on this conversation. She stiffens, like something in his voice puts her on edge. We need to keep note of that for later. But the other thing is he postulates that his accent is the thing that did it. And he's like, I've been told several times that I speak like a villain in some Eudorian opera. So like we'll get this. Hadrian keeps pointing to like his melodramatic nature throughout the series. This is the first time we're sort of hearing, well, one, people have told him before this event at 19 that he sounds like he's like a dastardly mustache twirling villain from some, opera. And lo and behold, he becomes the biggest villain in the entire galaxy at the
Yeah,
end of the
yeah,
story.
it's funny. Also funny that that's what he thinks is stiffening her.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So we get back and he is very much in, all right, I'm crashing this meeting mode. He's stopped. Guards are like, listen, bro, you can't storm in here. Like this is like a big deal. You can't just walk in. And he sort of forces his way in, like surprises them, gets past them. And
And in doing so,
yeah,
the doors that he's like pushing up are like huge, right? They describe them as like gigantic, the biggest doors, but they make no sound. And so
yeah,
he like tries to go in and apologize for his lateness, and then immediately like throws the whole meeting in a weird direction. where
Yes.
the director's like, who the hell is this guy? Like, why is he walking in our meeting? She
Yep.
could probably look and tell that, oh, this is some relative because, yeah, I think earlier in the chapter it mentions some. Well,
Their eyes and
yeah,
their
they
hair
look
and
alike, even though that they're very, very different. And we'll talk about Hadrian and his father and how they look in our next episode. But essentially, he's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm late. I wish local affairs kept me away or whatever." And his dad can't do anything but basically say, "Oh, this is my eldest son.
yeah.
Forgive his lateness or whatever." And then it's just seething in his table as Hadrian like clearly broke the rules, and then he tries to like tell Crispin to move over, and Crispin's like, "Why am I gonna do that? You're not gonna make a scene in front of these
Yeah.
people." And he's like, "Yeah, I was too much the gentleman to do that, but I did. I was petty enough as a kid where I pulled a chair up and stepped up 2 steps on the dais to be closer to Dad to shove it in Crispin's face."
What's crazy is first time I read this, I didn't catch that he grabbed the chair and like moved it.
Yeah,
You can like feel the tension in the room when he does this, right? It's so crazy. Like I can't, and we'll get more into Alistar in future chapters, but the idea of with future context doing this in front of his dad, who's like implied to be like this like intense dude. I just can't imagine being in that room doing that in front of his dad, knowingly like embarrassing his father. It's just it in Crispin, the whole thing. It's I can't even imagine. It's crazy.
imagine him like, at least in his mind at this point, he hasn't come to the realization yet that it's not working. So
Yeah.
he's just trying to play it cool, right? How many times have you been in a situation where you think like, yeah, that doesn't feel good, but it's fine. I'll try and muddle my way through this. Or you were just so like,
Hmm.
it's clear that in this situation, he has this sort of lack of self-awareness that it's not going his way yet. And we'll get confirmation of that. I
Yeah.
think we get a little bit of it with saying, I sat ignoring the muted outrage I could sense pouring from my father on the throne. It's like, oh, Dad's pissed. Forget about it. I can't do anything now.
And what's great about this too is before he steps into the room, we have the first introduction of rage is blindness, which is
Yes.
another one of our Gibsonisms. So he steps in, he's under his breath, rage is blindness, steps in, and then does this, right? And so like he knows he's been taught this idea that like anger is a blindness, and then he just does it anyway.
Like, and this is Rage's blindness is going to be one of our fear is the mind killer esque
Yes,
quotes
yes,
that will come up a lot during the series. Hadrian is clearly indicating that as a person and being an aspiring scholiast, that he is not very good at living their philosophy out, because one of the hoplites at the door is like, or no, Roban, who's like this, I guess he's like an elevated knight or one of the higher up soldiers in his father's employ. When he tried first, the first hoplite is like, yeah, nobody's going in. Hadrian's like, then says rage's blindness, tries to calm himself down, and then in a voice of command is like, get out the way. I'm more important than you.
yeah,
And then Raban, like somebody who's more familiar, maybe has been involved in training. We don't have a lot of history around him, but is like a named soldier in his father's employ. So like not at Felix's level, but like quite below. So like maybe right below it. Like puts it familiar enough to like normally put his hand on Hadrian and be like, hey man, sorry, your dad said no. He puts his hand on him and then he immediately gets pissed, right? So it's like throw Rage's blindness out the window. He gets pissed instantly and then pushes the doors open, and that's where he's like, oh well, now that I push the doors open, I have to follow through with my plans. And that's when the whole next part of the scene goes out. But it tells us a lot, right? I mean, it tells us that he is not a good scholiast, at least at 19 years of age, right?
yep,
It says rages blindness and then immediately gets pissed again.
yeah, man. It and that's chapter 3.
Yeah,
Hadrian thrusting himself into the middle of this room, embarrassing his father, undermining his brother, preparing for what will this the interesting conversation that will ensue. Man, that looks like it's the end of the first episode then, doesn't
which
it?
is crazy to think about after so
Yeah,
much time.
yeah.
Props to Ruocchio. You have made us take clearly almost 2 hours for like 20 pages of book. Um, we love your work. Thank you. And we can't wait to dig in more. I don't expect the future episodes necessarily to take as long. Chapter
No.
1 and those first
Chapter
2
1
pages
is pretty much
so dense.
Yes.
We may, in events like that in the future, we may just take a chapter at a time. We probably could have done just a whole episode on chapter 1. We will reference it again. So in future episodes, when we have such like big lore dumps and other chapters like 2 and 3 are more like action in them with a few asides, we may just take one chapter for those super important ones. But lots of good stuff in our first episode.
Absolutely.
Well, Drew, thank you again for joining me in doing this. We're signing off from the Devil's Rest Book Club, and as we will say on every episode, always forward.
And always down.
Good night, ladies and gentlemen.
Devil's Rest Book Club is Cameron Elston and Drew Welty. Today's episode discussed chapters 1, 2, and 3 of Empire of Silence by Christopher Ruocchio, copyright 2018. Empire of Silence was originally published by Daw Books, an imprint of Astra Publishing House, on July 3rd, 2018. Quality and editing and original music by Cameron Elston. Find us on YouTube. Contact us at devilsrestbookclub@gmail.com. Devil's Rest Book Club is a production of Disquiet Pods. This episode, copyright 2025, Cameron Elston and Drew Welty. Thanks for joining us, and always remember, rage is blindness.